She didn't come to that gala to win, she came to work. He's the one who turned it into a battle he wasn't prepared to lose. The room was already alive by the time Camille Erickson walked through the service entrance at 6:47 in the evening. Not the main doors. She never used the main doors on event nights. The main doors were for guests. Camille used the side entrance, the one that took her past the catering station, through the linen staging area, and directly to the point where she could see the entire ballroom in one sweep without a single person noticing she'd arrived. That was intentional. She needed to see the room before the room saw her, and what she saw was exactly what she'd spent 11 weeks building. Long tables draped in ivory linen, in each one carrying low arrangements of white garden roses and eucalyptus that she'd personally approved after rejecting 4 other proposals. Warm lighting suspended above every table, not too bright, not theatrical, the kind of light that made people feel like the best version of themselves without knowing why. The Whitmore Foundation seal, mounted cleanly on the rear wall, flanked by 2 discreet banners. The string quartet already positioned in the far corner, working through their warm-up pieces at a volume that complemented conversation rather than competing with it. She pressed her earpiece in, adjusted the small clipboard tucked under her arm, and said quietly, "Nadia, I'm on the floor. Give me a full status." From the other end, her second-in-command's voice came through clean and efficient. "Catering is on schedule. Bar staff confirmed 10 minutes ago. Floral West Side needs a minor adjustment. One arrangement is sitting 2 inches too high and it's throwing off the sightline from the entrance. I flagged it. Fix it before the first guests arrive. Already moving." Camille allowed herself one slow breath. Then she stepped fully into the ballroom and went to work. This was what she was good at. Not just the planning. Anyone with enough time and a detailed checklist could plan. What Camille did was different. She felt rooms. She understood the invisible geometry of an event, where the energy pooled, where it stalled, how the movement of bodies through a space either created ease or friction. She'd understood this since she was 23 and second assisting on a corporate dinner that nearly fell apart when the lead coordinator panicked over a kitchen delay. Camille had quietly restructured the evening's flow, bought the kitchen 12 minutes of buffer, and no guest ever noticed a thing. Her supervisor at the time had looked at her afterward and said, "How did you do that?" She hadn't been entirely sure how to answer. It just made sense to her. 5 years later, Erickson Events was her firm, and tonight's Whitmore Foundation annual gala was the most significant contract she'd ever landed. She told herself that was the only reason tonight felt heavier than usual. The contract, the significance, the career milestone. She told herself that as she did one final check of the entrance layout, adjusted the position of a floral arrangement by precisely 2 inches, and noted without meaning to that the corner table, the one assigned to Seo Capital Partners, one of the evening's premier sponsors, was set for 4. She already knew who would be sitting there. Before we go any further, stay with me, because this story is about a man who thought walking away was the strongest thing he could do. He had no idea it was just the beginning. His name was Seo Joon-hyuk, and if you were meeting him for the first time across a conference table, the first thing you would register was the stillness. Not coldness, stillness. The particular quality of a person who had learned early that the most powerful thing you could do in any room was to need nothing from it. He was 30 years old, the only son of Seo Byung-chul, or the man who had built Seo Capital Partners from a 2-person consultancy into one of the most respected private equity firms on the Eastern Seaboard. Joon-hyuk ran the firm's North American division with the kind of precision that made even people who quietly resented his position admit, privately, begrudgingly, that he had earned it. He was not arrogant. People often confuse the two, but there was a real difference. Arrogant men needed you to see them. Joon-hyuk simply moved through rooms the way someone moves through a house they've lived in for years. No hesitation, no performance, just the quiet certainty of someone who already knows where everything is. He had a single line of Korean script tattooed along his collarbone, visible only when his shirt collar sat open. He'd had it done at 22, but during one of the rare windows in his life when he had made a decision based entirely on what he wanted rather than what was expected. His father had never asked about it. Joon-hyuk had never explained it. The silence between them on that particular subject had always communicated far more than their actual conversations did. He met Camille Erickson 8 months before the Whitmore Gala. Seo Capital's annual investor dinner was an event the firm took seriously, not lavishly, but precisely. Joon-hyuk had cycled through 3 different event coordinators over the past 4 years, not because he was difficult, but because he was specific, and specific requirements tended to reveal very quickly whether someone was actually listening or simply nodding while writing something different in their notes. Camille came in for the initial consultation on a Wednesday morning. She arrived 4 minutes early, which he noted, and she brought a preliminary proposal that she had clearly built from scratch rather than adapting from a generic template, which he noted further. He reviewed it for 2.5 minutes, then set it down and told her that he needed the menu formatted differently, categorized by dietary requirement rather than by course, because 3 of his major investors had specific restrictions, and he didn't want them navigating a standard menu in public. She looked at the proposal in front of her. Then she looked at him. "I understand the reasoning," she said, "but categorizing by dietary restriction at a formal dinner signals to those guests that their needs are being managed rather than anticipated. Oh, what I'd suggest instead is a pre-confirmed menu sent to those 3 guests 48 hours in advance, so they arrive already knowing what their evening looks like. The main menu stays consistent, and no one at the table feels marked." He had not expected that. He didn't say so. He said, "Send me the revised proposal by Friday." She did. It was better than the first one. He hired her, and then, without either of them choosing it in any deliberate way, he found reasons to contact her directly rather than going through the standard coordination channels. A question about the venue layout, a note about a last-minute RSVP change, a brief call to confirm a detail that his assistant could have handled. She answered every time. She was direct, efficient, occasionally dry in a way that caught him off guard more than once. After the investor dinner went without a single visible complication, he sent her a brief message. "Excellent work," she responded 3 hours later with, "The kitchen staff deserves most of the credit. I'll pass it along." He read that message twice before setting his phone down. Over the following months, it became something neither of them had a name for. He told himself it was a professional rapport. She probably told herself something similar. But professional rapport didn't explain the Tuesday evening when they'd both stayed late working through logistics for a follow-up event and ended up walking 6 blocks in the same direction. Neither of them acknowledging they were heading the same way until they were standing outside a building Camille mentioned she'd always loved, an older structure with a rooftop garden that was visible from the street, and Joon-hyuk had looked up at it and said nothing, but filed the information somewhere quiet. Professional rapport didn't explain the article she texted him 3 weeks later, an architectural piece about that exact building, no caption, just the link. It didn't explain the coffee he started bringing to their meetings from the one place she'd mentioned exactly once in passing. Nadia noticed all of it long before Camille acknowledged any of it. "That man is falling for you," Nadia said one afternoon, with the casual certainty of someone who had simply stopped waiting to be proven wrong. He doesn't even know it yet." Camille had smiled and turned back to her laptop, but she didn't disagree. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning in early autumn. Joon-hyuk was at his desk reviewing quarterly projections when his father called, not to ask how the division was performing, not to check in. Seo Byung-chul did not make calls to check in, he made calls to inform. There was a merger being pursued, a significant one, between Seo Capital and Han Industries, a South Korean conglomerate with infrastructure holdings across 4 countries. The deal had been in quiet development for months, and now it was approaching a stage where it needed to be formalized, solidified, made permanent in a way that contracts alone could not fully accomplish. The Han family had 1 daughter. Her name was Han Soo-ah. She was 27, de-educated in Seoul and London, and by every measure his father considered relevant. She was a suitable match. His father did not say, "I would like you to consider this." He said, "This is what will happen," in the precise, unhurried tone of a man who had spent decades arranging things and had never once been told no by his own household. When the call ended, Joon-hyuk sat in his office for a long time. The city moved below his window. His desk was clean, organized, everything in its designated place. He looked at his phone. There was a message from Camille from earlier that morning, a photograph of a floral arrangement she was testing for an upcoming event, shot from above, the composition careful even in a casual picture. The caption said, "Too much or perfect?" He looked at that message for a while. He didn't respond that day. But he asked to meet her 3 days later, not at his office and not at a restaurant. He told her the address of the building with the rooftop garden, the one she'd texted him the article about, and asked if she could meet him there at 7 in the evening. She came. He had chosen the location deliberately. Standing on that particular rooftop, with the city arranged below them and the early evening light softening everything, felt like the least harsh version of a conversation that had no good version. Later she would think about that choice, that he had cared enough about the setting to try and make it easier. She still hadn't decided whether that made it better or worse. He told her everything plainly. There was a family arrangement. It had been decided. It was connected to the future of the firm, to a relationship between two families that extended well beyond him. He said he respected her too much to let it develop further without being honest. He was precise and careful, and everything he said was true. He used the word arrangement 4 times during that conversation. He did not once use the word want. Camille listened to every word without interrupting. She stood with her hands at her sides and her expression composed in the way that Joon-hyuk had always quietly admired, not closed off, just steady, the look of someone who had learned to process things without broadcasting them. When he finished, she was quiet. "The narrator counts it for you, 7 seconds. Then she said, 'I hope she makes you happy, Joon-hyuk.'" She picked up her bag. She walked to the rooftop exit. She did not look back. Because she already knew that if she did, she might not make it to the elevator before she came apart, and she had no intention of doing that. Not here, not in front of him. She made it to her car. She called Nadia. Nadia came. In the weeks that followed, Joon-hyuk moved forward with the controlled efficiency that had always defined him. He met Han Soo-ah for the first time over a formal dinner arranged by both families. She was gracious, intelligent, easy to converse with in the particular way of someone who had been raised to be easy to converse with. His father sat across the table, looking precisely as satisfied as Joon-hyuk had expected. He did not contact Camille. No call, no message. He had made a decision, and Joon-hyuk did not second-guess his decisions. But he had built his entire professional identity on the reliability of his own judgment, and to revisit this one would mean acknowledging something he wasn't prepared to name. But he slept less than he used to. He returned to the office on 2 consecutive Saturdays with no clear reason. Once, crossing a street near a florist's shop, he stopped at the window and stood there for longer than he could reasonably explain, looking at a white arrangement that was more or less identical to the one in that photograph she had sent him the morning everything changed. He stood there until a passerby brushed past him and he remembered where he was, and then he kept walking. He did not go back. 3 months passed. Camille did not spend those months waiting. That would not have been true to who she was. She restructured. She'd always been good at identifying what was functional and what was not, in events and in her own life, and she applied the same clear-eyed practicality to herself now. There was a period, contained and private, where the mornings were harder than they needed to be and certain songs required changing. She allowed that period to exist. She did not dramatize it, and she did not rush it. Then she got back to work. Ericsson Events pitched for the Whitmore Foundation Gala contract in late October. The pitch took 3 weeks to prepare and was, by Nadia's assessment, the best presentation they had ever put together. When the confirmation came through, Nadia cheered loudly enough to alarm the intern at the front desk. Camille stood in the middle of their small office and allowed herself to feel genuinely proud for about 90 seconds. Then she opened the client briefing document and started reading. She found it on page 4 under the heading Premier Sponsors. SEO Capital Partners, table confirmed for 4. She read the line twice, set the document down, picked it up again, read it a 3rd time. She considered for exactly 30 minutes calling the client and withdrawing from the contract. She sat with that option honestly and turned it over from every angle. Then she closed the document and said to herself, quietly, in her empty office, No, I built this. I'm not walking away from it. She did not mention it to Nadia until 2 days later, by which point she had already moved past it. She met Dr. Elliot Marsh 6 weeks before the gala, at a dinner hosted by a mutual friend who had been trying to arrange the introduction for longer than Camille had realized. Elliot was 32, a cardiologist, the kind of person whose presence in a room registered as immediately comfortable, not because he worked for it, but because he seemed genuinely interested in whatever the conversation happened to be about. When Camille mentioned briefly and without detail that she had recently come out of something difficult, he didn't press. He didn't offer reassurance she hadn't asked for. He simply said, "Then we'll go slow," in a tone that made it clear he meant it, and then redirected the conversation toward something that made her laugh. She found that notable. He asked 5 weeks later if she would like a companion for an upcoming event she'd mentioned. Not as a date necessarily, just company if she wanted it. She spent 2 days considering, which she knew was probably longer than necessary, and then said yes, because she genuinely enjoyed his company, because he made her laugh without effort and listened without agenda, and because she had already spent 3 months carefully navigating the perimeter of someone else's absence, and she was done doing that. "Green dress," Nadia said without being asked, "the good one." The gala began at 7:30. By 7:15, Camille had already resolved 2 minor catering coordination issues, repositioned a speaker stand that was creating an unnecessary echo near the east wall, and quietly redirected a photographer who had positioned himself in a way that would have placed him in the sightline of 3 different table arrangements. She did all of this while looking to every guest who arrived and glanced in her direction, like someone who had simply dressed well for an evening out. Elliot arrived at 7:20 and found her near the entrance, earpiece in, clipboard in hand, emerald dress moving with her like it had been designed for exactly this kind of evening. He took one look at the room she had built and said, "You made this." It wasn't a question. "We made it," she said, which was true, but she allowed herself the quiet satisfaction of his observation. He stayed close throughout the early part of the evening without hovering, a distinction Camille noticed and appreciated. He understood instinctively that she was working, and rather than competing with that, he simply occupied himself with conversation, refilled her water once without being asked, and checked in with her eyes from across the room every so often in a way that was easy and undemanding. At 8 o'clock, Seo Joon-hyuk arrived. He came through the main entrance with Han Sua at his side. She was in a deep burgundy dress, composed and unhurried, her posture suggesting someone who had attended events like this often enough to be entirely unbothered by them. Joon-hyuk moved beside her in a dark suit, greeting the Whitmore board members with the fluid ease of a man who had been navigating formal rooms since childhood. He said the right things. He smiled at the right moments. He was exactly who the occasion required him to be. He was halfway through a greeting with the foundation's executive director when something in the room shifted his attention. Not a sound, not a movement, just a change in the quality of the air and the way that certain spaces develop when someone you know has entered them. He turned. Camille was standing 20 feet away. She wasn't looking at him. She was half turned toward Elliot, who had apparently just said something that landed because she was laughing, fully, unguardedly, the kind of laugh that had no performance in it. Her head tilted slightly to the side. Her hand came up briefly to her collarbone as she steadied herself from it. Joon-hyuk looked at this for approximately 1.3 seconds before redirecting his attention back to the executive director, who was still speaking. He nodded. He responded appropriately. He did not hear a single word. Beside him, Sua continued her conversation with a board member's wife. She did not appear to notice anything. But when there was a natural pause in the exchange, she glanced briefly in the direction Joon-hyuk had just been looking. She registered what she saw. She said nothing. For the next hour and 40 minutes, the Whitmore Foundation Gala functioned exactly as Camille had designed it to. Guests moved between the dining area and the reception space with ease. Conversation flowed. The catering service was smooth and unobtrusive, and the program ran 4 minutes ahead of schedule, which in Camille's experience was the ideal margin. What the program did not account for was the particular geography of the room that evening, the way it arranged and rearranged 2 people who were both independently working hard to occupy it without occupying the same part of it. Joon-hyuk was in conversation near the far end of the room when Camille moved through it to address a detail near the bar. He shifted slightly, not obviously, just a degree or two, in a way that opened his sightline without interrupting his conversation. He would have said, if asked, that it was simply a more comfortable standing position. 20 minutes later, when he moved to greet a guest near the room's center, Camille rerouted a catering question to the opposite end of the space, handling it herself rather than directing it to the staff member who was closer. Nadia, watching from near the entrance, noted this and said nothing. They were both pretending. They were both failing, quietly and separately, in a room full of people who had no idea any of it was happening. Near the edge of the reception space, Han Sua stood alone for a few minutes. This was not unusual. She was perfectly comfortable in her own company, and the brief pause from conversation was welcome. But she used those minutes the way a perceptive person does when given a moment of stillness in a crowded room. She looked. She observed. She watched Joon-hyuk. She had spent 3 months learning the specific grammar of his behavior, the subtle indicators beneath the composed surface that told you what he was actually processing. She knew when he was engaged, when he was performing engagement, and when he was somewhere else entirely while his voice remained in the room. She looked across the space to where Camille Erickson was now speaking with a member of the catering team, earpiece in, completely absorbed in her work. She looked back at Joon-hyuk. She was not dramatic by nature, and she had no interest in performing distress she wasn't sure she fully felt. What she did feel was something more practical, a clarity that arrived without sentimentality and asked her simply and directly to be honest with herself. She smoothed the front of her dress. She lifted her chin. She walked back into the evening. Whatever she was going to do with that clarity, she would do on her own terms. At 9:45, the string quartet shifted tempo. The pieces they'd played throughout dinner had been ambient, present without demanding attention. This one was different, slower, fuller, designed for the part of the evening when people stopped networking and started simply being in the room together. Camille had chosen it deliberately for this slot in the program. She was standing near the edge of the floor reviewing a final timeline note on her clipboard when Elliot appeared beside her. I believe this is the part of the evening," he said, "where the event coordinator is allowed to stop coordinating for 4 minutes. She looked at him. He extended his hand with the relaxed certainty of someone who was genuinely not concerned about the outcome, only the offer. She looked at her clipboard. She looked at her earpiece. She set both down on the nearest surface and took his hand. They moved onto the floor without any difficulty, easily, naturally, with the unforced rhythm of two people who simply enjoyed each other's company and weren't pretending otherwise. He didn't try to lead dramatically. She didn't overthink it. It was comfortable. Across the room, Joon-hyuk was mid-sentence. That he had been speaking with a board director about a development fund proposal, a conversation he had prepared for and cared about and had been navigating competently for the past several minutes. He was aware, peripherally, that the music had changed. He was aware, peripherally, of movement on the dance floor. And then he turned, not fully, just a slight shift of his gaze, and he saw her. He stopped speaking. Not a pause for thought, not a strategic beat. He simply stopped mid-sentence for a moment too long to account for. The board director, to his credit, carried the conversation forward. He asked a follow-up question. Joon-hyuk answered it. He had no memory afterward of what the question had been. He was watching Camille and Elliot on the floor, and he was doing something he had never, in 30 years, allowed himself to do. He was feeling the full weight of a decision he had made. Not the rationale for it, not the structure around it, the actual weight. He had set something down 3 months ago that he had told himself, in the logical, organized, forward-moving way of a man who had always trusted his own judgment, was the right thing to set down. But looking at her now, he understood something that no amount of careful reasoning had been able to deliver. She had not been waiting. She had not been diminished. She had continued, warmly, fully, with the same composure and capability she had always carried, in an emerald dress in the room she had built from nothing. And the man beside her was laughing at something she'd just said with the uncomplicated delight of someone who had no idea how fortunate he was. And Joon-hyuk felt, with the particular discomfort of arriving somewhere too late, that he had not made a sacrifice 3 months ago. He had made an error. Safe was not the same thing as right. It had never been. He excused himself from the board director. He set down his glass. He crossed the room. He didn't storm. He didn't rush. He moved with the contained energy of a man whose composure had reached its edge and was choosing to walk to the thing rather than away from it, which was, in its way, the most honest thing he had done in months. He reached the edge of the floor as the music continued. He placed one hand briefly on Elliot's shoulder, firm, not aggressive, the signal of someone who needed a moment rather than someone issuing a challenge, and said, "Excuse me." Then he took Camille's hand and kept walking. Elliot blinked. He looked around, uncertain but not alarmed. Nadia, positioned near the bar with a clear sightline to the entire room, watched the whole thing with the expression of someone who had been waiting for a specific event to occur and was not surprised that it finally had. She picked up her glass, said nothing. He moved them through a side door off the ballroom into a corridor that ran parallel to the main space, quieter, removed from the event, the music audible but distant. Camille walked with him for 10 steps. Then she stopped. Joon-hyuk. Her voice was level, not loud, not cold, just steady in the way he had always known it to be. "Let go of my hand." He did. Immediately, without hesitation, because whatever had driven him across that room, he was not a man who held on when someone asked him not to. They stood a few feet apart in the corridor. He was breathing carefully, the way a person does when they are reacquainting themselves with the concept of stillness. She was watching him with a patience that had something structural underneath it, not hardness, but the particular quality of a woman who had already done the hard work of moving through something and had no interest in being pulled backward carelessly. He looked at her. She waited. He opened his mouth. Something organized itself, got halfway to his throat, and rearranged itself into something smaller. "You look well," he said. She almost laughed. He could see it, the slight shift at the corner of her mouth, the brief brightness in her eyes before it settled back into composure. "You stopped a man's dance to tell me I look well?" "No," he said. "Then say what you came to say." He couldn't. Not completely, not yet. Seo Joon-hyuk had 30 years of precision behind him, the careful architecture of a life built on saying exactly what was required and nothing that wasn't. And standing in that corridor, he had nothing that was required and everything that wasn't. And the language for that was not something he had developed. What came out instead were questions, careful, structured, slightly too neutral for the situation. How was the firm doing? Was she satisfied with how the evening had gone? How long had she known Elliot? And he said the name without weight, without inflection, which was its own kind of effort. She answered each one, directly and briefly, giving him nothing extra. Her face was composed, her hands were still. She was, he thought, the most put-together person in the building, and he had been the one to drag her into a side corridor while her own event was still running. Then she tilted her head slightly and said, "Why does it matter to you?" The question sat in the air between them. Joon-hyuk said nothing. But the silence that followed was not the silence of a man who had nothing to say. It was the silence of a man who had too much and no practice with any of it. He looked at her steadily, and she looked back. And what passed between them in that corridor without a single additional word was probably more honest than anything he had managed to say out loud in the past 3 months. Then Nadia's voice came through Camille's earpiece. Not a full conversation, just a tone and 2 words that registered across Camille's expression as a genuine time-sensitive issue. She straightened, or reached up and adjusted the earpiece, looked at him for a moment that was not cold but was very clear. "I have to get back to work," she said. "This is still my event." She stepped past him toward the door. "Camille." Just her name, said in the tone of a man who had finally run out of architecture. She stopped. Not for long, half a breath, half a step, but she stopped. The narrator holds that moment because it matters. She stopped. Then the door opened and she went back into the room. When Joon-hyuk returned to the ballroom, the gala was moving through its final hour with the smooth, unhurried momentum of a well-run evening. He found Sua near their table, speaking with another guest, and waited at a slight distance until the conversation reached a natural end. When she turned to him, her expression was composed. She reached to a nearby table and handed him a glass of water without being asked. Then, in a quiet voice and in Korean, she said, "You should figure out what you actually want before this goes any further." He looked at her. She held his gaze without flinching, without sharpness. "I'm not asking you to decide anything tonight," she continued. "I'm telling you that I won't quietly become someone's second consideration while they pretend otherwise. That's not something I'm willing to be." She wasn't threatening him. She wasn't performing the role of the wronged party. She was simply a woman who had looked at the situation clearly and had decided, with the same practical composure she brought to everything, that she was entitled to say the true thing even if it was uncomfortable. Joon-hyuk said, "Sua, not tonight," she said. "It's not unkindly. Just think." She picked up her own glass and rejoined the room. The gala ended at 11. Camille saw the last guests out, confirmed with the venue coordinator, released the catering staff with her thanks, and stood in the emptying ballroom for a few minutes once the room was down to the cleanup crew. The tables were being cleared, the floral arrangements stacked carefully, the warm lighting dimmed to working levels. The room looked different stripped of its guests, larger, quieter, returned to itself. She had done good work tonight. She let herself feel that cleanly. Elliot found her near the main entrance as the last of the staff moved through final procedures. He had clearly been waiting in a way that was patient rather than hovering, which was, she had noticed, a quality that defined him fairly consistently. And he didn't mention the dance floor. He didn't ask about the man who had walked her out of it. He simply said, looking around at the winding down room, You were impressive in there." She looked at him for a moment. Elliot, I need to be honest with you about something." He adjusted his stance slightly, not tense, just attentive. "Okay," he said. She didn't tell the whole conversation. What the narrator gives us is this. They talked for a while, standing near the entrance as the venue returned to its ordinary self around them. Elliot listened the way he always did, fully, without rushing toward his response. By the time they said goodnight, something between them had changed in texture, not ended, not dramatically shifted, but settled into something that was more honest than what it had been at the start of the evening. Whatever it was going to be from here, it would be built on ground that had been cleared of pretense. That mattered. It was the kind of thing that, if tended carefully, could become something real. Late that same night, Joon-hyuk's apartment was very quiet. He had not turned on the television, had not put on music. He sat in the stillness of a space that he had designed to be clean and orderly, in which everything functioned as intended and nothing was out of place. And he understood in the particular clarity that only arrives after a long day is finished, that a very orderly external life was not the same thing as an honest one. His phone held 3 unread messages from his father about the merger progress. He had not opened them. On his desk, where he had set it after pocketing it on the way out of the event, was the printed program from the Whitmore Foundation Gala, the Whitmore Foundation's formal seal, a brief message from the board chair, the program for the evening's proceedings, and at the bottom of the first page, in clean, unassuming font, Event Design and Coordination, Erickson Events. Lead Director, Camille Erickson. He read her name, set the program down, thought, picked it up again. 10 days later, Camille was at her desk reviewing contracts for an upcoming engagement, a corporate anniversary dinner for a real estate group that was straightforward enough that she could process most of it on a single read. The office was quiet. Nadia was in the front room. The day had the particular productive quality of a morning that had already resolved its early complications. Her phone rang. She looked at the screen. She knew the number. Now, she had not deleted it, which was either sentimentality or pragmatism. She had never fully decided which. She let it ring twice. She answered, "Joon-hyuk, I know you're busy." His voice was measured, but not in the old way, not the smooth, frictionless control of the conference room. There was something underneath it, something he wasn't covering. "I won't take long." She waited. "I spoke with Sua," he said, "and I spoke with my father." The room was quiet. Outside the window, the city continued its ordinary business. "I'm not asking anything from you," he continued. "I know I don't have the right to ask you for anything, Camille. I'm not calling to do that. I'm calling because I needed you to know that I said the things I should have said 3 months ago, to myself first, and then to them." A pause. I handled things in a way that was careful and cowardly, and I dressed it up as responsibility. And I've spent 10 days sitting with that. Another pause. Longer. She didn't respond immediately. She let the words exist in the space between them without rushing to do anything with them. She was not the kind of woman who filled silence with reassurance she hadn't thought through. Then, finally, okay. It was one word, simple, unadorned, carrying no more than what it was, not a welcome back, not a door swinging open, just an acknowledgement, direct and quiet, that she had heard him and that the thing had been said. Okay, he echoed. Neither of them moved toward hanging up. The line stayed open for a moment that was made entirely of everything they weren't saying yet, not with longing, not with pain, but with the particular quality of two people who have finally set something heavy down and are standing in the new, unfamiliar lightness of it. She didn't say come back. He didn't ask her to, but something had shifted. The pretending, the careful management, the architecture of controlled distance they had both been maintaining on their separate sides of 3 months. It had been named, and what was underneath it, once all of that was cleared away, was simply the truth. Two people who had understood each other in a way that didn't arrive easily and didn't disappear cleanly. What they were going to do with that truth, whether it became something or remained simply what it was, an honest reckoning with a moment they couldn't undo but could at least stop pretending hadn't happened. That was a story for another day. And that, as the narrator says, is exactly the point. She didn't say come back. He didn't ask her to. But something had been put down, and in the space where all that carefully managed distance used to live, there was just the truth. What they did with it now, that was a different story entirely. And if you want to find out what they did with it, drop your thoughts in the comments right now. Did Joon-hyuk call too late? Does Camille give him that chance? I read every single comment, and I want to hear where you think this goes. If this story held you from beginning to end, hit that subscribe button, because there is so much more where this came from. I'll see you in the next one.